Happy 2025 BookTube. I always said happy 2024 there. I'm Jack, this is Red Book Joy, and today I want to tell you all about my favourite books of 2024, and there were quite a few. I've split it into categories, so if you don't want to hear about all of the books and you want to hear about certain types of books, you can have a look in the description box below because I will put timestamps so you can skip forward to the ones that you want to know. If you just want to know what my favourite book of 2024 was, you can do that as well, but you might miss out on hearing about some wonderful, wonderful books. I've kind of split it up into categories because I don't think the books are all comparable in some ways. So yeah, have a little look at my categories below. I'm going to start with children's books, middle grade, and a couple of picture books. Then I'm going to go into rereads, non-fiction, and then fiction. And fiction I've split into two categories. I've split it into just books I had a good time with, which are worth mentioning, but they're not books that are gonna, be revisited and reread or win any literary prizes. And then I've put my absolute favourite books that I loved, that I would reread and recommend wholeheartedly. And yeah, so that's how I split it up. So let's get into it. First up, picture books. Two picture books I want to mention. One of them is Mushrooms Know, Wisdom from Our Friends the Fungi, and there are two, so it's an author illustrator here for this, Callie George and Sarah Gillingham, and this is a non-fiction children's book all about mushrooms and fungi. Basically, it's just beautiful. Look at it, it's so cute. The end papers I fell in love with, so you've got the little mushrooms with the mycelium network, and I was sent some books by Greystone Kids, this brilliant Canadian publisher, very ethical publisher, this time last year. This time last year? No, it was round about February last year, and they sent me these books and I've reviewed them, and I've got a link in the description box for the video where I reviewed all of the books, including this one. But this is just gorgeous, really beautiful. The art illustration is just so cute, and the facts about fungi in here are wonderful. So yeah, I highly recommend that. The other book I absolutely loved was Dim Sum Palace by X Fang, and this is kind of in the style of Maurice Sendak's In the Night Kitchen, which is a classic kind of surreal dream that a boy has where he goes to sleep and he goes into the kitchen and he's tiny and everything's big. And the similar thing happens here. So Liddy is told by her family they're going to go to the Dim Sum Palace, and she's never been, and she thinks it's an actual palace. So she falls asleep and has this dream where she's going through this, what she thinks is the actual palace. See the palace there? And she gets rolled up into some buns and some filling, and she ends up in some dim sum. But yeah, it's just so beautifully drawn and stunning. It's funny, it's humorous, and just gorgeous. And then if you look under the dust jacket, you've got a menu for the Dim Sum Palace, which I love. So yeah, this is a stunning book, and yeah, highly recommend. Now then, middle grade. I'm going to give three honourable mentions. One of them is for a book that I do have a physical copy of, because a lot of them I don't have physical copies of. But this one is Sisters of the Lost Marsh by Lucy Strange. I'm going to link a review to it. It was wonderful. I read it in January last year, and it was perfect January reading. It's set on a marsh, which is based on Romney Marsh in Kent, and it's about 6 sisters, and one of the older sisters has to get married to someone she doesn't want to get married to. And the night she's been given to this man, before she gets married, she's been told she's going to marry this man. She goes to the full moon fair with her sisters, and she has her fortune read, and then she disappears, and one of the other sisters has to go looking for her. It's just wonderful. It's beautifully written, it's adventurous, it's feminist, it's about the power of education and all sorts of things, and yeah, loved it. Then I read Keedy by Elle McNichol. This isn't in any particular order, to be honest with you. I say then I read. I'm going to recommend Keedy. Keedy is a prequel to a book that I absolutely loved. Elle McNichol's debut, A Kind of Spark, was about one of my favourite middle grade characters, Addie, who is neurodivergent, and she lives in a tiny Scottish village. Keedy is her older sister, who's also autistic, and Keedy is a prequel. So it's just wonderful. Keedy's a great character, and I will link my full review of that book as well if you're interested. And then I also want to mention a book called How to Be More Hedgehog. And this was a book that I got out of the library on Libby because I just saw it and it just looked so pretty. I'll put the cover up here. The cover was gorgeous, and it's by someone called Anne-Marie Conway, and I am going to do a review of it because I'd never heard of it, and I think more people need to read it. And it's all about a lovely character called Lily, and Lily has a stammer. Lily knows an awful lot about animals and nature. Her dad works in a national park in Scotland, and she lives with her mum, and her dad and mum broke up a few years before, and her dad has a new family, and Lily loves going to stay with her dad. She loves living with her mum as well, but her older brother is still really angry about all of it, and so Lily has to deal with the fact that her brother won't talk to her dad and go and stay with him when she does. At school, she's got she has trouble because she's got to do a sort of speaking project, a presentation, and her stammer is just getting worse. So I just loved this character, and as soon as I opened the book and started reading it, I couldn't stop reading it. So I am going to do a review of this one, but yeah, check it out if you like the sound of that, How to Be More Hedgehog by Anne-Marie Conway. I want to talk about my top 3 middle grade books. These, I would say they're in no particular order, but I think I had a favourite, but I loved all of them so very, very much. And I want to tell you about a graphic novel called El Defo by C.C. Bell, which I'll put pictures of up here because I got it out on the Libby app. I waited months with this on hold on the library, and it finally came through, and I loved it. I absolutely loved this graphic memoir. C.C. Bell became profoundly deaf after a bout of meningitis at the age of 4 or 5, and she has written this graphic memoir, or drawn this graphic memoir, and within it, all of her Cece and her family and her friends, everyone is portrayed as rabbits. I'm not sure about the choice there. I don't know what it was for, but it works so well because it may add some levity to what could otherwise be quite a sad memoir. But it's really illustrative of her experience growing up deaf in the 70s and all of the issues around that, and the ableism that she encountered, and all of the problems that she encountered, but also the superpowers. So she kind of has this alter ego because she hears someone calling deaf person Defo or El Defo, and she creates this alter ego for herself called El Defo, who's a superhero. So yeah, it's a wonderful book, wonderful. I'm going to get myself a copy of it. I think it's one I want to reread, and I definitely want to do a proper review of it. So if I do get myself a copy, I will do a proper review as well. It was just wonderful. Highly recommend that. Then the Legend of Podkin One Ear by Kieran Larwood, which is not a new book, it's quite an old book. I'm late to the party on this, but I read that and it's the next 2 books in the series. And I just love this. If you like things like Watership Down or any sort of anthropomorphic tales, of adventure, Redwall is probably the one that I would say it is most like. Then you will enjoy The Legend of Podkin One Ear. It's about a rabbit called Podkin, and he's going to be the chief of his warren, but he's very spoilt. And there are these evil rabbits called the Gorm. They aren't really rabbits anymore. They were sort of taken over by this metal thing, and they invade his warren, and he has to go on the run with his sister, and it's just adventure. So yeah, it's wonderful. So I really loved that, and I've got a review of that. And then my favourite, I think, out of all of them, though I don't know because I think it's equal. I think Podkin and El Defo and this are my favourite. They're all kind of tied, but I loved The Whisperwicks by Jordan Lees, and I haven't put a review of it out. So towards the end of the year, and I'm going to talk about this when I review my how my year went on BookTube, I was putting out less of the one book reviews that I wanted to put out more of, and this has definitely got to have a review. It's just brilliant. It's all about a boy who doesn't really believe in magic, and he ends up in this world where everyone in this world has what's called a poppet, and they have a poppet which kind of is their like a magical doll that's part of them, and the world that they're in is like a labyrinth, and none of the streets stay the same, and you can't map it, and you can get lost really easily. There's far more to it than that. I can't explain how wonderful and magical this book was. I loved it, and there's a sequel coming out in the new year which I'm very excited for. So yeah, The Whisperwicks by Jordan Lees, fantastic. Okay, so before I go into the other best books of the year, I thought to myself that I wouldn't include rereads, but I have to. I have to include rereads because I'm a big rereader. I get such pleasure out of rereading for a number of reasons. I I find it helps me to revisit something I loved, reaffirm my love for it. I spend time with characters that I know I'm going to enjoy, that in worlds that I like, or worlds that I'm intrigued by. Sometimes they're not the nicest of worlds, but they're worlds I'm intrigued by. And I had such great fun with these rereads this year. And I'm like, why am I not mentioning them? Because they might be rereads to me, but they might not be to you. So I'm going to mention them. Guards by Terry Pratchett. I talk about Terry Pratchett a lot on this channel, not enough actually. I want to talk about him some more on this channel, but Guards is, I don't know, it's one of my top favourite Discworld books. If you've never read Terry Pratchett's Discworld, it's a 41 book fantasy series. I've got a video on where to start with the Discworld if you're not sure about where to start with it and what it's about. It kind of explains the Discworld, but I just love Guards, and I can't really go into it too much, but essentially there's a city watch and there are dragons attacking the city and they have to figure out what's going on, and it's just brilliant, funny, touching and wonderful, and it's the start of the City Watch sequence within the Discworld, because the Discworld is, you can read any Discworld book as a standalone novel. You'll get far more out of it if you read them in a particular order. You don't have to read them all in the publication order, but there are sequences that you should read in order, and if you're going to read the City Watch books, you should start with Guards, and it's just wonderful. So yeah, I'm going to say I just got huge pleasure. I read this, I read this most years actually, sometimes a couple of times a year. So yeah, I love this book. Then off the back of that, I reread Terry Pratchett, A Life with Footnotes, by Rob Wilkins. Rob Wilkins was Terry Pratchett's personal assistant, and he worked with him for 20 years, and he manages his estate now since he died. And it's not only a brilliant biography of one of my favourite author of all time, and one of the people that I most admire of all time, but it's just a brilliant biography. It's wonderful. If you want something that's written with a lot of love and care about a fascinating individual who was just taken from us far too soon, then yeah, it's just wonderful. And I cried yet again when I read the end of it. And I won't go into too much. I've also got a video on this, but I love this book. It's one of my favourite books of all time. It is Shogun by James Clavell, and I reread it with Gemma from Gemma Books, because I've said to her so many times, you're going to love this book. And it was her second favourite book of last year. Just missed out on being the first favourite book of last year, but yeah, she loved this. And it is a whopper. It's like 1,000 and something pages, but you just race through it. It is so good. It's about feudal Japan and an Englishman being the first Englishman to land there, and yeah, all the politics and the intrigue and the excitement, and it just kicks off from page 1 and it doesn't let up right through to the end. So yeah, Shogun is amazing. If you watched the TV show, the recent adaptation, read the book. The book is fantastic. And then of course a reread of just one of the most wonderful books that gets better and better every time I read it, The Fellowship of the Ring. The Fellowship of the Ring is the first part of The Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings is one book in 3 volumes. People will say like a trilogy. It's actually one book in 3 volumes, apparently. So yeah, I just love The Fellowship. Fellowship is my favourite of the 3 books. So I'm in the middle of the 2 towers at the moment. So, but yeah, I still think Fellowship is my favourite. We'll see. But I'm loving Andy Serkis's performance of these books, though controversially I've never really liked the Tom Bombadil sections, and even Andy Serkis can't make that enjoyable for me. But despite all of that, still just wonderful. If you've never read The Lord of the Rings, if you're someone who loves the films and you've never read it, read it. Just read it. It's so wonderful. And one that I hadn't read for 25 years, something like that, and it is A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth. And this started out as a group read with the lovely Lindy from Lindy's Magpie Reads and Jolene from Bookworm Adventure Girl. They set this up, and I've been wanting to reread this for many years. I read it when I was like 19 or 20, so gosh, nearly 30 years ago now. And basically this book wow, it is such a great book. It is epic in its scope, in the cast of characters. It is set as India has just gained independence from Britain, and they're about to approach their first general election. That's the kind of like social political thing that's going on. They've just had partition as well, and it's just a general a moment, a huge moment in Indian history, and it centres around a mother's attempts to find a suitable boy for her daughter Lata. And Lata is one of the main protagonists in the book, because there are several families and they all interlink, and we follow different characters for, and it's just beautiful. It's a brilliant book, and I loved it. And it's funny as well as heartbreaking and informative, and yeah, a great book. I loved it. The audiobook is also very good for that one. So my favourite books of the year, non-fiction and fiction for adults, aside from the rereads, and the rereads give you an example of what I consider to be the pinnacle of great books that I love, books that I revisit, and rereading a book is a big sign that I loved it and it will be a 5-star book for me. So I'm going to start off with non-fiction books, and I absolutely loved Strong Female Character by Fern Brady. It is her autobiography about growing up neurodivergent and not knowing that she was autistic. She was an autistic female because autism is very often undiagnosed in girls and women, particularly of a certain age, and she spent a lot of time struggling with fitting in the world and not knowing why she wasn't, and not knowing why everything was so difficult and why her mental health was so bad. So she was an undiagnosed autistic person, and it's a great book. It's harsh, it's honest, it's brutal, but she is wonderful at just expressing and describing what things have been like for her. And I've got a review of that book as well, which I'll link in the description box. Then I absolutely loved How to Say Babylon by Sophia Sinclair. This was shortlisted for the inaugural Women's Prize for Non-Fiction, and Sophia Sinclair is a Jamaican poet, and she grew up in a Rastafarian family, and it's all about her life living within this very strict patriarchal religion, and her father being quite abusive and being in complete control of her and her mother and her siblings, being sort of not only the sort of patriarchal figure, but he was their sort of religious leader as well. So yeah, it's really fascinating and beautifully written. I'd highly recommend listening to it on audio because she reads it herself and it's just wonderful. And another book that I absolutely loved this year, and I've reread it since reading it earlier last year, and that is Meditations for Mortals by Oliver Burkeman. I've talked about it a few times, but I loved Oliver Burkeman's 4,000 Weeks, which is time management for mortals, and it's all about accepting that our time on the planet is finite. So Meditations for Mortals is about how we spend that time, and he's a big advocate of being realistic about how much time you have and how you spend it, and thinking about how you really want to spend your time. So kind of a anti-hustle culture, anti-productivity book, really. It's not about doing more, it's about doing less. That's his kind of mantra. So figuring out that actually if you haven't got time to do everything, so what are you going to do with your time, kind of thing. Yeah, it's just a great book. Okay, so those are my non-fiction reads. So fiction, I've split into 2 categories. So I'm going to talk to you about the books that I just outright had a good time with. So these books will not be in my 5-star category. So you see these types of books, these books that I've said to you are rereads that I loved and that I will reread again and again and again and again. So the books I'm about to mention to you are not those type of books, but they are books I had a brilliant time with. These books for me, if they were a meal, they would be beans on toast. Which sounds like it's insulting, but it's not, because I love beans on toast. Who, if you're British, doesn't love beans on toast? I heard it's not an American thing. Americans probably think we're weird for it, but beans on toast is comfort food, right? You've come in, it's wet, it's rainy, you've got nothing in the fridge to make, you've got some bread, you've got some beans, you have beans on toast and a cup of tea, and that to me is just, yes, give me that. I want the familiarity and the cozy. I just want to immerse myself and just get lost. These are escapist reads. They are not going to be books that I go back to, but I had a great time with them, so they have to be mentioned here. First up is A Lady's Guide to Scandal. So this is the follow-up to A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting, which I haven't read, but A Lady's Guide to Scandal I did read, and it's all about a young woman. It's set in Regency England, and her husband dies and she inherits this fortune, but with the fortune, because her husband's family are absolutely outraged that she's got his fortune, there are some caveats. So the husband, just to annoy some of his relatives, leaves her all the money, but she must live a really kind of chaste, non-scandalous life, and if there's any hint of scandal, then the money will go off to his relatives. So yeah, it's wonderful. It is just fun. Really, really enjoyed it. Then I absolutely love this book. I whizzed through it. The Highgate Cemetery Murder by Irina Shapiro. I don't read a huge amount of mysteries these days, but when I do, they tend to be historical. I love a historical mystery, and I love a good series with great detectives, and this is one of them. I heard about it over on Jim's channel, Jim's Books, Reading and Stuff, and loved it. So it's Victorian setting, and we've got a female and male two detectives. The male detective is actually a police detective, and the woman is she's a nurse, and she's come back from the Crimean War, and they meet each other because her brother has been murdered, and it is dark. These are not cozy mysteries. These are they're quite graphic, they're quite full on, but just fast paced, well plotted. Love the characterization, and I'm definitely going to read more of these books. Really, really good. So that's Irina Shapiro's books, the first one being Highgate Cemetery Murder, and I've got the next one lined up on my Kindle to go, so I really need to get into that at some point. I carried on with the Richard Osman Thursday Murder Club books. I read books 2 and 3 last year, finally, after reading book 1 in 2020, I think, and yeah, loved it. I've got book 4 to go, and book 5 is coming out soon, I believe. So yes, I'm going to read book 4 soon, because it's just cozy, and I love this world and I love these characters. Then I also really loved Saga. So I read volume 1 of Saga. Gemma, my lovely friend Gemma, got me this for Christmas. So volume 1 of Saga, I started reading it on Everand. I cancelled my Everand subscription. Gemma got me it for Christmas, so I finished. I actually just inhaled this on Christmas Day. So this is volume 1 of a graphic novel series about a family, 2 soldiers fighting on the opposite side of a war that's been going on for some time, and they have a baby, and then everyone's out to get them. Steamy, it's sci-fi, it's funny, it's humorous, it's a little bit gory. So yeah, not for the faint-hearted in some ways, but absolutely loved it. So I'm on volume 4 at the moment. I've got volume 4 out on Libby. On to my favourite books of the year, and these are in no particular order apart from the last one, which is my favourite book of the year. So first up is Red Country by Joe Abercrombie. It is the 6th book in his first Law World books. So there are 3 trilogies. It's supposed to be a standalone. You can't read it as a standalone. It wouldn't mean as much to you if you read it as a standalone, but it was a wonderful end to storylines that have been going on for 6 books, and it's kind of Joe Abercrombie like fantasy does a western. Just brilliant, gripping, brilliant characters as always, and wrapped up some stories that have been going on since book 1, and yeah, loved it. And bittersweet, because it was the last book that Gemma and I read with our lovely friend Alice. Alice and Gemma and I worked through all of those books together. I'd previously read the first 3 books, and I'd been meaning to go on and read the other books and hadn't, and we started reading them together at book 2 because I recommended the first book to Alice and she loved it, and I was like, let's read the rest together. So then Gemma joined us, and yeah, we've been reading those books together for a couple of years, and that was the last book that we finished with her. So wonderful book, but we've got 3 more books to go, and I don't know if Gemma and I are feeling up to reading them yet, but we will do one day, I'm sure. But yes, absolutely wonderful series. And that one, I don't think it's my favourite out of all of them, but it was my favourite that we read this year, because the other one that we read was The Heroes. Dragged a bit for me. Anyway, so the Red Country by Joe Abercrombie. Next up is Sweet Dove Died by Barbara Pym. I love Barbara Pym. This is my 3rd Barbara Pym book, I think, and I loved it. She's a great writer, and I read this with Marilyn, whose channel I'll link in the description box below, and we really had a great time talking about this book and discussing it. Barbara Pym's character work is just sublime. She is, if you like Jane Austen, you'll like Barbara Pym. It's just the turns of phrase and the way characters talk, and just sitting there thinking about these characters, and yeah, just wonderful, very funny, and also quite poignant. Again, it's about, because I read Quartet in Autumn, which is about getting older, about older protagonists, and there's an older woman in this book who is getting older, and she's being courted by this man who owns an antiques shop, but she's more interested in his nephew, and they have some sort of relationship. I don't think it's a sexual one, but then the nephew is gay. Yeah, it's a great book, really enjoyed it. I've only got 2 more books to go. One of them is my favourite. This one, not quite, but if I hadn't read the book that is my favourite, this could have been my favourite book of the year, and this is The Trouble with Mrs. Montgomery Hurst by Katie Lumsden. Katie has a wonderful booktube channel, Books and Things. If you've never seen it, go and check it out. If you watch me, you probably watch Katie, because Katie is just one of those booktubers whose events I take part in all the time. She is just a lovely person, Last year she released her debut novel, The Secrets of Heartwood Hall, which I loved. I'll put a link to my review of that as well. I've got a full review of this, so I'm not going to go into it too much, but it is essentially set in Victorian times, and it is about a village of people, actually. The concept is that Mrs. Montgomery Hearst marries one of the men in the village, who's a really eligible bachelor that a lot of people are after, and he marries someone that no one has heard of and brings her to the town, and everyone's gossiping about her. So that's Mrs. Montgomery Hearst. And so we've got a load of different characters that the book follows, and different storylines. It's just so well done. It's a really great book. It's a page turner. It's full of gossip and intrigue, and also just fun. Really, really great book. So highly recommend that. If you've not picked up any of Katie's books before, I'd recommend either of them. But yeah, I'll link my full review video to this one in the description box below. So that just leaves me to talk about my favourite book of 2024. This one is also bittersweet. So this book was part of the FOMO book club, which I run with my lovely friend Gemma. And if you're not familiar with the FOMO book club, I will link a video to it in the description box below. You can go and check it out. We are doing 6 books over a 12-month period, so we do 1 book every 2 months, and we usually run from November to the end of October. And so we started a new period of the FOMO book club in November, and it's the first year that Gemma and I have picked books without Alice. We started the book club with our lovely friend Alice, and Alice passed away last year, and so we decided that to keep our connection with Alice and to honour Alice's memory, we would read some of her favourite books. Cloud Cuckoo Land, she championed it, and we were like, yeah, we'll read it. And then we didn't read it, and then Alice died, and we read it and we loved it, and she was right, and we all loved it, and we couldn't talk to her about it. But it's a wonderful gift and legacy from my friend who I miss every single day. So thank you, Alice. You were right. You were right. I've got a full review video out for it. I've talked about this book at length, but essentially Cloud Cuckoo Land is really hard to define. It is a love letter to libraries, librarians, and books and stories. It is a book centred around an ancient text, and there are 3, possibly 4 interconnecting timelines, one in the past, one in the present day, and one in the future. And each of the characters is connected by this text, and you don't figure out how they're connected until the end of the book, and it's just very compelling. Each character is wonderful. The stories are really wonderful. It's a brilliant book. And if I said any more about it than that, then I'd be spoiling it, because I think the beauty of this book is in seeing how it all unfolds. And I loved it so very much. And I'm going to go back and reread that. So that book goes in the pile like those. And actually, The Trouble with Mrs. Montgomery Hearst is one that I reread as well. I have reread it since reading it the first time. But yes, just go and read it. So those are my favourite books of 2024. And if you have read any of them, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it in the comments. If you are thinking about reading them, let me know. If you would like to pick up any of them and you want to help the channel out, I do have a 5% discount code for Books Please, an online book retailer. If you use it, you'll get 5% off. I will get some small percentage of the, I think like 5% of the cost of the book at no extra cost to you, but it just helps run the channel. So yeah, if you fancy doing that, please do. And if you've never been here before and you like the sound of any of these books, these are the sort of books that I read and I like. So if you like them as well, or if you're interested in more books like this, maybe subscribe, and hopefully I will see you again here soon. Bye.